Welcome back. I'm still joined by my guests and two new guests to give us further perspective on our topic at hand. Wilfred Moyo, who is an investment economic strategist at Metropolitan. Also joined by Nolene Parboo from Standard Bank, Senior Manager there for Deposits in Retail Banking. And in our Lagos Bureau, I'm joined by Nimi Akinkugbe, Chief Executive of Bestman Games. Now, this is to continue our conversation as to how best to financially prepare for life's major events. Now, just before the ad break, with Nolene, we're discussing the rate of savings, especially in the Southern African environment, Wilfred, when it comes to saving for funerals and death cover. In your perspective, do South Africans maybe save a bit too much for this and ignore the other necessities and factors that they need to save for?
Yeah, I think in the South African context, we've seen more people going for the funeral savings and some people actually having more than 2 or 3 funeral schemes and neglecting all the other areas, for example, retirement and or saving for education, for example. You find that very few people save towards that. But funeral, most of our population have a funeral benefit of some sort.
That's a good thing, but I take it, like you've alluded to, it can be slightly bad because then we ignore all the others.
Exactly, especially, I mean, I don't see the reason why one would have 3 funeral covers. I mean, you find a person having a funeral cover of 45,000 and then you multiply that by 3. It's not really necessary. You rather cover yourself for other events that may take you by surprise. Yeah. Let's
go to Nimi now, who'll paint a picture for us from the West African context of things. Nimi, I understand maybe financial preparation for death in Nigeria is still a bit of a taboo topic, and unlike the South African counterparts, tend not to save for funerals or the passing away of a loved one.
Yes, when it comes to estate planning and just talking about death in general, it's a bit of a taboo subject. We don't really like to discuss dying. It's almost as if you're anticipating death if you talk about it. So sadly, a lot of times you find people are having to borrow for funerals and almost going bankrupt to pay for a lavish funeral because we have extensive extended families. So funerals end up being huge events which are very, very expensive. So we look forward to a time when we would have these sorts of tools in place to help people to prepare for funerals and put something in place for their loved ones.
Nimi, to stay with you though, for the average Nigerian who's listening, does this mean that they need to wait for the appropriate product to be put in place before they can save efficiently for this? Or can they take the power into their own hands, and save for them for these events themselves?
Well, you know, with more and more financial education, people are beginning to save on a regular basis for, you know, life events, but there could be so much more done. And really, because of the traditional ceremonies and so on, it can be very, very expensive. So no matter what they've saved, you're finding that families are having to bring out a huge amount of money to prepare for these events, whereas a simple insured plan would be so much easier to have in place.
It almost seems like we need to go back to creating efficient awareness around this. But another taboo issue. You're quite right, Nimi. But another taboo issue, and I want to come to you for this one, Nolene, is divorce. Because when we all say I do, we have the fairy tale idea in our minds that maybe this will never end. But unfortunately, it does. And sometimes it finds the female counterpart or the one who's less financially independent on the losing end. I take it there's several considerations to take into account here. The kind of marriage contract in place, you know, how you actually monitored your asset purchases during the marriage as well. In the South African context of things, your view on this one?
So from a South African perspective, I think the key thing is really as a female and as a female going into marriage is to be very aware of how you manage your finances, being able to have a good understanding of, to your point, the asset purchases and the marriage contract right up front. Going into that, understanding exactly how the marriage contract will be managed going forward, and should something to that effect actually happen with divorce, how that would actually be then managed. I think as females we often you know, probably think that it's okay for the male to manage the financial awareness of the family, etc. But it is critical to always have an understanding of what's happening, of your finances, planning appropriately, having a good understanding of how that actually has an impact on your asset allocation, and then also you know, being able to understand that, you know, should something go wrong further down the line with a divorce, is what that actually means for you from a financial perspective. I think often women are caught quite unaware of what to do, and that's why it's important to always have a good financial planner that's that you're speaking to always have a good view of how you manage your finances.
You're quite right, and I take it you need to start that conversation before things go sour, right, Wilfred?
Yes.
Because it's highly unlikely that you'll both want to be sitting opposite each other and discussing that. But I know it's a bad thing to say, but we can't necessarily go around in our marriages considering that divorce might happen. But I take it you agree with the ideas that Nolene shared with us?
No, I mean, certainly. I mean, I think now we're at the time where both partners need to educate themselves financially. I mean, it's critical that when you're making financial decisions, you sit together and actually plan way ahead. And taking into account that should such an event happen, what should we do? So I know we always tell ourselves that it will never happen, but there is always that chance that it might happen. So people have to plan. Same applies. I mean, the probability of a person dying is 1, but we avoid that topic.
Yeah.
Similarly with divorce, there is a probability. So you need to actually say, honey, what will happen if this event was to happen? So plan together, educate yourself financially, know that if you happen to get through this situation, you can still depend on yourself. Yeah.
Nimi, to come to you, I know that you're quite passionate about females and their financial emancipation, but is this also quite a rife and maybe taboo issue again, discussing finances at divorce in Nigeria?
I think that's improving now. With a lot of the work that we're doing is to try to get women to take greater responsibility for their financial lives. But you still have that traditional gender role where the woman expects to be taken care of by, you know, the male members of the family, father, spouse, partner, and so on. So, but that is beginning to change. But we still find that women are lagging behind in terms of taking those bold steps. So as far as having discussions about the family finances, that is still not happening as much as it should be happening. You know, so you find that many times a woman gets married, she doesn't know who owns the property, she doesn't have a clue about what's happening. And if there's a problem, a lot of the time women find themselves left in the lurch with the family house or assets and so on. They don't have a clue about the family finances. But I think it's improving a lot, and there's a lot of work to do there.
Just to stay with you for a moment.
I was just going to ask about South Africa. Are prenuptial agreements common there? I've noticed that that's something that's becoming an issue on the African continent. Is it something practiced in South Africa quite frequently now?
Indeed, let's get our experts to give us that one. Prenuptial agreements quite prevalent in South Africa. I would think there's a fair split, and
there's a fair split. I do think that people are aware of their financial, you know, their finances, and they want to have a good understanding of that right up front. And to the point made earlier is that, you know, both partners must be aware of what the finances are of each of the individuals, so that, you know, further down the line, you know exactly how to manage that should something go wrong.
So true.
Yeah, I think, I mean, especially when you consider when a couple goes and takes an insurance cover, you need to actually know what your responsibility is, especially if it's a joint cover where it's both spouse and myself signing the document. We need to know that when an event such as this happens, what happens to the cover? Can I continue as an individual, or do we need to lapse this thing? If you lapse it, it might cost you an extra bit to actually go and open a new policy. So it's very critical to know way in advance what it means if we were to divorce in all these things that we have. If you bought property and maybe your marriage contract was COP, what do they call that?
In community of property.
In community of property. What happens if we divorce? Do we need to sell, or can we divide our property? If we've got 2 properties, can one take the other and I remain with the other? I think that we need to educate ourselves before the event happens. Yeah.
In the case of retirement, though, is that also something where we're falling short on?
Certainly.
Especially given the fact that we have large extended families and you have to take care of these senior citizens.
You know, I mean, what I would like to say or emphasize is that, especially if both couple or both the spouse and myself in this case are working, it is very important to find out what your employer offers. Some employers do have what is called a spouse's retirement fund. So if you sit down and actually plan together and say, you know what, I'm actually employed by MMI, I've got this contribution that I'm making towards my retirement fund, but I've got an option to actually cover you in a separate retirement fund. All those things are actually advantageous. If you happen to separate or divorce, that spouse's retirement thing, I do not touch it. It's yours 100%. So it's important to know all those aspects. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Nolene, I take it you agree?
Yes, most definitely. I think it is important, especially with retirement, to plan, as we spoke about earlier, from a young age and have a good understanding of exactly what's available. You know, it makes sense to start that at least 25 to 30 years before you plan to retire, so that you understand exactly what the contributions are and what the end kind of lifestyle you want to live. Exactly. And plan accordingly, and plan to save at the right levels and the right percentages as you mature as well as an individual, that you're consistently looking at the way your investments are structured, how you're saving, and where the bulk of your saving is actually being contributed.
So true. Nimi, just before we go to notes to self, I want to get your quick word on retirement saving. Nolene mentioned something so poignant, is that the constant review of your retirement savings to ensure that you still have enough and that you have the right amount of exposure to generate a relevant return. In the Nigerian perspective of things, is this something that the members are cognizant of?
So we've got a fantastic scheme. The Pension Commission has a scheme where employers contribute and match the employees' savings. And that's in most companies that have 5 or more employees. So they pay we pay 8%, sorry, and the employer pays 10%. So 18% is going out into savings of the employee's basic salary, which is quite significant. Of course, that is not going to take care of a long-term retirement. So people are encouraged to save on a regular basis on all the asset classes, you know, right through their working life. But that is a great scheme that really does work. And it's doing quite well.
Well, let's have a quick recap of the key takeaways of tonight's conversation. Nimi, let's start off with you. Indeed, you have answered our questions quite efficiently, but the key things that you would want any viewer watching tonight to remember about financial planning for life's major events, what would they entail?
I think that every single life event, whatever it is, from a new baby to retirement, has a financial implication. So it's just so important for everyone to plan ahead for those life events to ensure that they're well protected and well prepared. If you aren't prepared for a major life event, it becomes such a burden, as opposed to it being a wonderful life event that one should go through and enjoy with one's family. So it's all about being prepared and about planning.
Preparation and planning. Nolene, your key takeaway points for tonight?
I think to touch on what Nimi's raised, it really is around planning. You know, as you move through the life stages, expenses change. You know, as you mature through life, it's to really just understand at each point, have a review and a check as to where you are in terms of income, savings levels, and to really understand how you're managing and are you meeting the goals that were put down initially and achieving those, and if need be to reassess the goals that have been put down, and then consistently look at ways of how to save and to better save towards those goals. I think is critical.
Indeed. Wilfred, from your perspective, what do you want us to remember tonight?
I think the critical thing is education, education, education. Educate yourself on financial matters.
Yeah.
It's critical. I mean, interact with people who add value in your life. Many a times we group around people who don't actually add any value at all. So I think if we want to learn how to curb against certain risks in our lives, financial risks, we need to learn. Expose yourself to people who are actually in the field, and they will teach you the tricks of life.
Exactly. Thank you so much to all of you for your insights tonight. That's unfortunately where we have to leave it for personal finance this evening, but a big thank you once more to my guests, Wilfred Moyo, who is an investment economic strategist at Metropolitan, Nolene Parboo from Standard Bank, she's a senior manager for deposits in retail banking, and in our Lagos bureau, Nimi Akinkugbe, who's a chief executive officer of Bestman Games. Now do remember that we want to hear from you, and maybe you can tell us how you've managed to prepare for life's events. You can tweet any of your comments or suggestions to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself at Gugulethu on Twitter. Until next time, take care everyone. Welcome back. I'm still joined by my guests and two new guests to give us further perspective on our topic at hand. Wilfred Moyo, who is an investment economic strategist at Metropolitan. Also joined by Nolene Parboo from Standard Bank, senior manager there for deposits in retail banking. And in our Lagos bureau, I'm joined by Nimi Akinkugbe, chief executive